Hello, and welcome back to another episode of The War for the World's Survival. For those that are new to the series, it's been a while, but here we are. Again, to the ones that are new, I will clarify that this is a story that I am writing. It is in current development for about 2 years now almost. It's a book that I'm writing. It's a series that I'm writing. It's going to involve all types of different things: movies, books, shows, YouTube videos, and multiple spin-off series. And this is a huge universe that I'm creating. But today we're going to, and we've talked about quite a few chapters already in the series. There'll be a playlist linked below, which this will be part of. And we've talked about the stories up to this point. So what I've been doing is the first book is a brief understanding of the entire war. This is a war that lasts from 2040 all the way up until, at the current moment, we're at 2100. So this is over 100-span-year war, and it's still going strong. There's different generations that take part in this war. There's different eras of this war. The struggle era, the harder era, the glory era, which is the era we would start winning, and then obviously there's bad eras as well. And so keep in mind that not all these videos are necessarily going to be in order. Some of these are going to be taking place in the past, going over things that happened even before the war began, kind of getting the world kind of set up. But there's also going to be stories that are happening like today's, which we're going to talk about a soldier's experience that I wrote. I didn't write about yet in the book, but it's something I'm thinking about doing, because some of these characters are going to be specifically for this series. So kind of like anyone that's interested in the book can get kind of a sneak peek into the world through these videos. We're also going to be talking about obviously the regular book as well, but this is a lieutenant who was just a private when he joined the army at the age of 19. He joined about a year before the war began, and we're going to be picking up his story. And this is going to be quite a long one, so sit back and relax. This might be like over 50 minutes long, so this is going to be quite a long video. But we're going to pick up his story near Fort Donelson, which is a fort that will be positioned in northern Afghanistan, going towards the European side of the continent. And this is a young man who didn't join the military for like glory or for war. He joined the military purely as a profit for money. So during this era, during like the early 2040s, this is talking about a time on Earth that's pretty much peaceful as it possibly can be for humans. We're talking about no wars right now. There's some small conflicts happening with small terrorist groups, but for the most part, the U.S. military has been pretty much the dominant force on the planet at this point. They have pretty much dismantled most heavy terrorists, like things like ISIS, and like all the Islamic groups that are over there have been pretty much wiped out. And so you have some small cartels, small funnels of terrorism, but it's not anywhere near what it is now. In fact, most of Afghanistan by this point is actually a metropolis. It's huge. It's got cities, skyscrapers. There's a profiting oil community. Civil rights are booming in Afghanistan. You have women getting rights, and African Americans, as well as many other cultures. And the Middle East is becoming the new hotspot, right? It's becoming the new Los Angeles, the new California, the new New York City. It's becoming this place that everyone's coming to begin their lives. And obviously, if you've been watching out the story, things aren't going to stay nice for very long. Less than a year in 2040, we're at the end of 2040, the world pretty much at this point had been pretty much disarmed. A lot of militaries had disarmed, like places like Switzerland, Germany, Russia, Ukraine. A lot of those European countries have no militaries at this point, or if they do, they're small state militias type formed militaries. They're only a couple 100,000. They only have a couple vehicles, not a whole lot of ammo. They're not like, I mean, it's just if something goes wrong, they have something to respond with. And of course, everything changes when the exil attack. And we're going to talk about a little bit about the first few days, and then we're going to catch up to the lieutenant's story. So let's kind of recash the first few days of the exil invasion. The xil were not named for quite a while. So for the purpose of this video, we're going to call them xil. But that is what the alien forces in this story are called. Something I wanted really easy, something that people would remember. It's very easy to remember xil. It's 3 letters, so super easy. And I wanted it to be something that kind of rolled the tongue quite well. But these were unknown, right? Just like any other alien species that would come to Earth. There's a good chance we would probably not know what they're called, or we just make up a name as we go. And that's kind of what happened to the xil. The xil were named that, and really we never looked back after that. And so on July 1st, the Global Peace Alliance, or the GPE, met in Afghanistan area to talk peace alliances, talk negotiations with how Afghanistan was going to be split up, because at this point it was like Germany. We were going to be split it up. Each country was going to get a chunk, and they were going to profit off that, and then the people inside also could profit. Basically getting rid of the power struggle that is happening right now in Afghanistan in the real life, because that's a big problem with Afghanistan. Afghanistan doesn't have a government. Well, it might. I don't even know at this point, because they're always collapsing and new regimes are taking over. And so when you have regimes taking over and collapsing and taking over and collapsing, there's always a power struggle, which is causing all the chaos over there. Many people think it's just because of foreign powers. It's not. The Afghanistan's been at war for hundreds of years. Even as far back as probably even ancient Rome era, right? So it's always had a power struggle issue there. And because of this, the Global Peace Alliance knows they have to form a peace alliance with all the regimes, spread them out, and give each country a chunk of land to kind of keep an eye on and make sure that they're profitable, and then the power regimes are kind of controlled. And this does work for quite a while in the testing phases, but when they met to finalize it, kind of, putting the last few things in to finalize it, to make it public, the xil would launch a full-scale invasion of Russia, and then they would hit Great Britain. Now, France and Germany and a lot of other middle of the European countries, they're going to be the first ones to know, just because of the chaoticness of the battle. The United States in general, other than the politicians that were in the GPE Alliance location doing that, knew what was happening. With obviously this two foreign powers now being fully invaded. Like, we're not talking just a bomb strike and that's it. We're talking full-on spaceships landing, troops unloading. It's a full-scale invasion. Most of Russia and most of Great Britain are wiped out in the initial invasion. And those countries will continue to fight for many, many years, but as far as we're concerned, they're pretty much all wiped out for quite a while. They will struggle very, very much in the coming years. We won't hear much of them until the late 2090s, 2100s. That's when they kind of spot up again. But that's mainly due to the fact that we investigate those countries and find that there is resistance groups forming. But it's a lot harder to run in places like Russia or Great Britain. Great Britain obviously is a small island. It's not a huge island. It's obviously big, houses a lot of people, but it's not like a whole, the size of the United States size or size of Africa or something. It's very small in comparison. And then obviously Russia is very, very cold. The Siberian wilderness to the backside of them pretty much, and then to the front of them is other countries. So if they're falling back, they're just falling back into other countries, and those countries are now starting to see invasion as well. So that was the first few days. That's about 3 or 4 days worth of time. And within this time, there is a bunch of around about 249,000 U.S. troops spread thin throughout the entire European continent. Now you might ask why. Well, first off, this is quite normal, okay? The U.S. military, as it's standing currently, does actually spread its military quite thin. Most of our troops are here at home, but we have like our left arm pretty much everywhere else. And that left arm gets spread extremely thin through different bases in different countries. But we do this because it's easier to rotate troops out. But obviously, in an alien invasion, having small pockets of men everywhere is not going to be great, because you're trying to concede resources and make sure you are maintaining strong points. And we're going to find out here in Lieutenant. We're going to call him John for the purpose of this video. But John is going to be stationed with a small group in the northwestern side of Afghanistan in a valley. And and his patrol is basically stationed as an outpost. Okay, and these outposts are stationed all over Afghanistan, even in today's world. And these outposts are just small pockets of military personnel, medics, scholars, whatever. And these pockets either help build up the local economy, or they just help protect it or deal with the terrorism threats. Now, when everything happened initially, orders were sent out wildly. The U.S. government initiated a full-scale, the highest tyranny and difficult and fear for the U.S. military to begin full rotation. We're talking nuclear warheads are armed. We're already seeing multiple nuclear warhead strikes in Russia and off the coast of Great Britain near Antarctica direction. Or not Antarctica, sorry, Iceland. I always get those two mixed up. But anyway, they're launching nuclear warheads. We're having nuclear warhead impacts. Jesus, I can't speak today. And we're seeing a lot of action. But the problem is the globe is so large. So like a lot of times you're not going to notice things. Like you're not going to notice a nuclear airstrike from thousands of miles or hundreds of thousands of miles away, right? Right. We didn't see the nuclear strikes on Japan from the United States, obviously. So like it's kind of the same sense, right? You're not going to notice that. The skies wouldn't really change. At this point, nuclear warheads aren't as toxic as, say, previous era nuclear warheads. We're getting into the era where radiation's really not all of that big of a threat. These are more of like a hydrogen bomb, I guess you could say. They're more of the fire bombs, but they're nuclear scale, so they're very strong. They take out a lot of area very quickly. And because of this, that's what the U.S. is doing right now. This is the only method, okay? The exil come, and there's two types of exil that are in the initial invasion. Now, obviously, as we know from previous episodes and from the story, if you've gotten to read parts of it that I posted online, there is multiple waves of invasions throughout this book so far. 3 main invasions and then about 150 small-scale invasions. These 3 main invasions come about every 30 to 40 years. So usually you have an invasion. You'll start towards the end of that 40-year period. You'll have like a winning streak. They'll abandon Earth, and then a couple months later, a couple years later, they'll be back, and you'll have another span of war for another couple of years. And this is something they do quite a while. We're on wave 3 of that, so this is something quite common, and that's just because of distance they have to travel. So like when they're coming, the first wave came to Earth, they're going to be pretty much on their own for quite a while. And the exil very quickly realize that the humans are not going to give up very easily, but there's one thing the exil are really good at, and I feel like it's something we should mention because it's going to be really hammered in later in the video, and that is the exil are very, very good at quick punches. Okay, they're like your boxers that are known for getting those quick jabs in, knocking you on your ass, and that's it. Okay, they can't actually last that long in the ring. Like you get one of these jabbers in the ring, and all they're good at is throwing a couple punches, knocking you out, and that's it. But if you get them in like a situation where there's a bunch of them, or not a bunch of them, but like they're in a situation where there's someone who can last a while, take some hits, and he can outlast them, they're usually screwed. It's kind of how the exil is, right? They hit a lot of hard hits. They will hit the globe and the entire human civilization very, very hard. We're talking in the first 10 years, around 1.2 billion dead within the first year. And they hit us hard. I mean, it is noticeable, like, in some cities across the United States and Europe in the first year, you will go from a city that you may see 20, 30 people on a road walking up and down the street to some cities going down to 1 or 2 people on an entire roadblock walking up and down the road. And so you're going to see a huge drop off in the population. Obviously now, if you've watched the videos again, you would know. If not, I really stress you go back and kind of get some ideas of things I've written so far, so you kind of have a base understanding around the whole situation on Earth. But there's around a population of around 10.1 billion around there, give or take. So there's still quite a, like, Earth's really populated at this point. I mean, most of the United States has been like architecturally is pretty much architectural. There's a couple farm areas, but farm has become less of a need, as you know, doing like getting chemicals mixed together and chemistry and all that. There's been more of doctored food and stuff. But anyway, the group that is a part with John, Lieutenant John, is going to be the 122nd Marine Division. Now, And it's actually quite rare to see Marines being stationed as peacekeeping troops. A lot of times you'll see it's Army or even National Guard, whatever. But the Marines have become the foremost military force of the United States military. The Army has been reduced. A lot of the National Guards have been reduced. It's been mainly just pumping it to the Air Force, Space Force, and the Marines and the Navy. Now, one thing that will help the U.S. in this war, too, is the fact that the xIL don't really fuck with ships all that much. They don't fight in the oceans. They're not really, other than a little bit up in Greenland, but otherwise they don't really fuck with ships too much. So a lot of U.S. Navy ships aren't actually touched, which becomes safe havens for a lot of troops. A lot of these Navy vessels become floating governmental buildings or medical buildings or children and women refugees camps. Like aircraft carriers become very viable because if they can hold a vast amount of people for very long. And so the Marines and the 122nd Marines are stationed in Afghanistan. When the news comes about the invasions in Russia and the UK, they don't reach everybody. Who would have guessed? It comes down to a situation where you have these groups just roaming around these mountaintops in Afghanistan. And one specific occasion that John will write about in his memoirs, is he's one of the very few survivors of his unit. He will write in his memoirs that they were just on a normal patrol, and he talks about how there's the sky was different, and they couldn't figure out what it was, but it looked different. It looked darker, like a darker skin tone almost. And it didn't look natural, right? I mean, when do you look at the sky and see it dark? At night. But they're sitting here at 9 a.m. and it's dark. And so they're very confused. But what is actually happening around the world is the ash from fires breaking out from the nuclear bombs, as well as the entire full-scale invasion of multiple countries in Europe is starting to fog the European continent with like a smog. But it's still early in this invasion, so the smog hasn't like dropped or anything, so it's still kind of tinting the sky a little bit. And I tell you this to kind of get you into the sphere of this. Imagine you're an infantryman, you're running around in heavy U.S. military gear, you're running with your M4 assault rifle, and you're clearing houses and doing all this stuff that you normally would do. And it just starts getting darker and darker and darker and darker and darker, and your human instinct is to look up and go, what the fuck is happening up there, bro? And so this is what the unit does. They pretty much stop in the middle of this cavern. Now, understand in Afghanistan, it's not just all flatlands. There's mountain peaks, but these caverns are really well known for being, like, you'll have these mountain ridges that will be like two semi-big mountains. They're more of like a hill, but they're long hills. Kind of like the Appalachian Mountains. Because these Appalachian Mountains are not actually that high, like peaky. They're more of like a round, kind of just like leaning hill style. Anyway, these are oftentimes patrolled, right? And a lot of times, there's actually a movie about this called Outpost. It's about how there's an outpost positioned inside one of these cavern regions. And so you're in this region. You're looking up to the sky, and out of nowhere, two massive drop pods begin falling from just out of nowhere, from the darkness. Now, it is important to put yourself in that situation again, to realize you are in the hot fucking desert, the sky just turned dark, and now there's these big alien-looking ships just dropping out of thin air. Things go horrifically wrong. Within 30 seconds, the xIL launch a full-scale assault against this small group. Looking back on it, even the military experts don't understand why this happened. It appears that maybe one of the dropships miscalculated and dropped off target. I think the original target was probably the center city that was nearby, and they just missed it. Anyway, John's unit and these xIL clash. They clash, and they clash, and they clash. And about 4 hours of fighting, about 27% of John's units wiped out, with one single confirmed kill on the xIL side. The xIL pushed them 144 miles back. Now think about that, right? Imagine being in constant firefights for 144 miles. No sleep, no food, no water breaks. You're constantly full of gear, and you're losing men. Every mile you take, you're losing somebody. You're losing a guy. You're losing a guy. You're losing a guy. You're losing a guy. And so this happens for months, just months on end. They're just constantly getting attacked, constantly getting attacked. Finally, about 3 months it took the U.S. military to fully kind of get their shit together. Once they finally did, messages were finally sent out saying, hey, all units retreat to the last pillar of humanity. And they nicknamed this because it was the last pillar for Europe. It was the last pillar for humanity in Europe. The idea was to mass all 1.2 million U.S. and friendly troops from other countries and put them in one smack dab spot. Now this is a bridge line between France and Germany. You guys may know it from World War II, but it would be near the area near the Ardennes. Now there's some mountains in that area, some hills, etc. And one of the hills was nicknamed the Pillar of Humanity. Now the objective here was to hold the xil off for as long as possible, because the U.S. had nothing to do. Like, they had nothing they could do to stop them. This idea was to just throw as much manpower as we could possibly do to control the situation, to give scientists an idea of give them a chance to come up with some ideas to deal with the situation. Because one thing we've learned is that, again, I go back to those invasions. Because of these separate invasions underneath the massive invasions, there was different types of troops that were coming. So initially, it was small hand troops, sometimes referred to as fodder troops. And these xil fodder troops were lightly armored. They had semi-decently strong weapons. They were just a lot of them. They had the numbers. And then you had the heavy troops. And the heavy troops were super heavy armored, 5.56 rounds, 7.62 rounds would just bounce right off them. These guys were super strong. They had big guns. And we're going to start seeing the mountain destroyers, which we're going to talk about in a minute. We're going to talk about some other things. They had some M269s, or nicknames, the Hell's Retrievers, just because they were hell on Earth going against them. They were shooting 27,000 rounds a second. They were basically giant miniguns. And they could be pretty much set up in about 30 seconds. So you would have them at the Battle of the Pillar of Human Society. You had a ridgeline nearby. The xil would set up a defensive perimeter, and they would put about 150 of these guns along the entire perimeter. The memoirs from different troops, specifically John, would quote it as saying it was a sound of death if you could hear it, which I think is a fascinating way of describing it. This is because it was so loud that a lot of men met death. We saw about 40% of the survivors. There was about 113,000 survivors from this battle. Yes, out of 1.2 million, only about 113,000 were able to make it off of the continent, and basically all of them were death. The sounds were so loud. It said that you could hear the firefights all the way down in Gibraltar on the edge of Spain. So that's hundreds of thousands of kilometers away. So it was loud, right? And these were strong weapons. They were big calibers. We're talking calibers the size of your neck or your hands, and these would cut through chunks of rock, metal, planes, jets, helicopters, everything. Tanks, the Abrams that we had, everything. And so the xil were hitting hard, and they were hitting harder and harder. And so eventually John's unit did make it to the pillar of humanity. And when they made it to the pillar, you would think that this operation would be prepared. But it indeed was not. They got there was barely any defenses. The planes, the F-16s, the F-22s, F-35Bs, they were doing everything they could to hold back any advancing xil forces, but the xil aircraft were just superior. We're talking supersonic, intergalactic fighter jets that these xil had. I mean, these things could go basically invisible. They had cloaking technology, and so they would be coming up behind an F-35B, and they would just annihilate it. We saw around 400,000 aircraft shot down, and half of them, their pilots with them, sadly. So the Air Force really does step their game up in this situation. They're really doing everything they possibly can. And so with this happening, the 122nd Marines featuring John, and then we have the 132nd U.S. Marines, and then we have the 42nd Ranger Battalion, which is through the U.S. Army, and we have a couple French divisions, a couple German divisions, and they begin to conjugate on these mountains. Now, the first thing with military tactic is you don't want to just put all your men in one spot, and this is unfortunately something that happens here because of the chaos. There's never been a time in human history before where everybody as human is on the same team trying to figure out what the hell's happening, and they're taking hundreds of thousands of casualties every battle. I mean, just the troops retreating from Ukraine area that we had stationed there, we were losing hundreds of thousands every mile that we were falling back. So we were losing tons of men. So these two U.S. Marine divisions, this U.S. Army Ranger division, they fortify themselves around the pillar of humanity. And this will begin a 3-day siege that will see more men dead than all of humanity, pretty much. Obviously not more than the World War II, but other than the two World Wars, this will see probably more dead than any other battle in human history. I mean, this is to the point where this really wakes up everybody into realizing that this is going to be a war that everyone is going to feel for decades and decades and decades. But let's rewind and kind of understand this battle. So to understand the layout, you have to understand the way the mountain's shaped. So the mountain is not a full peak. It's layered. So again, it's like a hill. And so these men begin digging in. The U.S. Marines dig in. The 2nd U.S. Marine Division that's there, they dig in. Then that Ranger Division digs in. And because of this, they find themselves in an awkward position. They dug too low on the mountaintop. And by what I mean is, so imagine you're on top of the mountain, right? And you're looking down. But sometimes mountains, they have rock slides or whatever, and erosion. And so you see some areas that are steep, some areas that slide down nicely, other areas that have a rougher edge. And they basically find these light areas, these middle areas, where they can kind of put ladders down and stuff like that. And they dig in on those bottom perches. Now, tactically against humans, it's a good position. Right, you have the cover of the mountain behind you. You have a good height over the enemy. You can put some 50 cals, M249s, snipers, etc. there. The problem is the Exil, they're not going to fight normal. They're going to fight dirty. They're going to fight aggressive. They're going to fight with airplanes. They're going to fight with space lasers from their ships. They're going to fight with mountain destroyers. Now, let's talk about a mountain destroyer real quick. Let's kind of get an understanding, because mountain destroyers are going to be the cause of so many dead and the gruesome deaths that will become in this story. Mountain destroyers are something I haven't talked about in this book yet, and there's something I've just recently came up with. I haven't been writing much, but I'm kind of starting to get out of that writer's block, and I have a lot of ideas again. And so, mountain destroyers, they're like a giant floating tank. Okay, these floating tanks come quite late in this first invasion because they just took time to get prepared when they landed. And these like tank-looking things, they basically shoot a large missile. We're talking the size of a cruise missile from a ship or something. But it has an ordnance of a lot higher. We're talking almost 100 times the ordnance. And so these things will be, they'll come up, and what we'll see here in this battle is they'll perch themselves on the edge of a mountain, and they will fire. And when they fire, it looks like a laser. But it goes so fast. You see the flash, and you can almost follow the flash. But it gets going so fast that even though you can see it, you don't hear it and you don't feel it. And so the flash hits so hard, it hits the mountain. And what the missile does is it has a few second timer. And so when it goes in the mountain, you're like, that's it. The ground doesn't rumble, doesn't make sounds, and then boom, massive explosion, throwing rocks, chunks of mountain, chunks of hills, chunks of humans, thousands upon thousands of feet in the sky, causing one of the most massive explosions that probably anyone has ever seen in their life. It is a testament to the Exil technology. Now, John has not seen much combat up to this point before this war. And so He is obviously frightened, but he finds it important to take the moments he has to write down anything he can or record anything he can. And so these messages that he would send back to his home are, I think, one of the most profound things that a human should ever have to go through. So to understand his story, we're going to start on day 1 of the fight for the pillar of humanity. He starts it off with, the days were calm, the battles were no more. When he had reached the mountain, they had finally got enough distance between them and the exile where they had about 24 hours of peace at the hill. And he described night lights that night before the battle began as one of the most beautiful nights in human history. When I looked at the night, the stars were bright, brighter than any stars ever. The fog had cleared up. The skies weren't dark from the ash anymore. All the dead right in the fields behind us and in front of us and all around us. But the stars shined bright as almost a hope of a better tomorrow for the sorrows that will surely come in the days to come. We stayed up most of the night looking at the stars, counting all the ones that seemed brighter than the others. We could hear the distance, the rumble of an evil killing machine that wanted nothing but our death. That night would be the last night for many men. The following morning, they will be woken up to a 4.5-hour bombardment from exil mortars. We're talking, these mortars exil use become very common. Pretty much the only piece of machinery they will use for the majority of the war. They are quick, easy to assemble, and they can shoot very high-powered rounds. It becomes the main form for them for quite a while. Now, John was stationed pretty much off to the right side of the mountain, so he wouldn't be a part of the initial explosion from the destroyer that we'll talk about in a little bit, but he would surely write about it in his journal. But he experiences the battle in a weird way, because he would experience some of the most gruesome fighting, but he would have a lot of dry periods that would allow him to write these periods down. He described the opening minutes of the first assault from the exil, which they actually did manage to propel, and they would propel a bunch of assaults, but this is the first time they actually got face to face with the exil infantry and were able to actually put up a fight. Obviously this one wasn't going to last very long, but I'll let John explain it to you. After the bombardment, we got to our positions, dug in, made sure all our ammo was loaded. Many of us prayed to whatever God we could find in our hearts. Some put pictures of their loved ones next to them on the dirt, so that as they were fighting, they had a reason to keep going. The exil attacked us in 3 different waves. Each one we propelled and propelled, propelled. The bullets whizzing past my head. What I could only feel were bullets as well. We have no idea what they were using. They were tall, freakishly tall, as my friend once wrote. I would say no more than 7 feet tall. Bulky sons of bitches. They were bulky. The commanders stood taller than the others. a form of discipline over their faces. They just ran at us. The first wave, we slapped. They fell back to the tree line. We get bombarded. They push again. Slap, fall back. And this process repeated. But it was the fourth wave. Something was different. The atmosphere was different. This time there was no bombardment. This time they didn't push us. They waited. And they waited. A corporal to my left, he had the radio. We nicknamed him Radio Jack. He called for an airstrike. We had lost hope that our guns would be enough. Most of us barely had enough ammo as is. They called in for 3 F-16s with 500-pound bombs to lay waste to the enemy positions. And normally in war, hearing your team fly over you is a comforting feeling. But this time, we didn't hear them. We didn't hear them. They never came. We kept calling, as every man would die left and right, above and below me. It came to a point where most of us were laying next to corpses, using them as body shields, praying for their souls as well as mine. But we couldn't. God, we just couldn't hold that fucking line. We would retreat up the mountain, scaling it for our dear lives, and some ballsy ass general on the other side would tell us get our asses on the other side of that hill. Humanity's behind this hill. We will fucking hold it, or we will die. Thinking, he isn't gonna die here. We will, but he will not. Got our positions again, grabbing whatever we could, grenades, guns, just tossing anything we could possibly throw at them. And that's when it happened. The fourth wave. The fourth wave was not what we were prepared for. 9 foot tall, muscular looking, mechanical looking, humanoid looking things came out of the tree line. Probably about 250 of them. And we shot them. And they didn't even flinch. Not a flinch. What John had just witnessed was the heavies. This is the first official look at the heavies. These were by far the strongest Azil that humanity had encountered so far. Their weakness was explosions. The problem was, as we heard earlier in John's message, that he called for backup on the air, for air support. Unfortunately for him, that air support was never going to come. When he called for backup, 22 U.S. F-16s were sent out to assist John and the rest of the Marines holding the line. Unfortunately, they would be intercepted and they would all be shot down. Air travel was vetoed. This was hard for a lot of men there. Some of the most gruesome battles recorded was here. 3 days later, John would write the moments leading up to the Mountain Destroyer's first shot. It's been 3 days. Low on food, water, and ammo. Men are pouring in behind us from the mountains. The left flank has been destroyed, and we are holding on barely in the right. The middle, all the poor guys in the middle, man, they're struggling. Came from there yesterday, delivering a message from my CO to them. The blood soaked the ground, turning into a bloody mud or a bloody soup. The limbs were everywhere. Men to the left of me, dead, with their eyes open. To the right, half their face gone. No man, none, should have to witness the things that those boys had witnessed. To those that may read these letters, I fear that we may not make it past this day. And if we shall not, be proud of who you are and where you're from. Don't stop fighting, no matter the cause. These boys here today, in the last 2 days, hell, this whole time, have given everything so that we may be free. This was 5 minutes before the first explosion from the destroyer. Now, the events going forward were not cattled by John, but by aircraft, mainly AC-130s and drones that were in the skies, trying to do everything they could to help the situation, and they would catch a lot of the situation unfold. Around 4:45 p.m. on April 14th, 2042, less than a year after the war began. So it's been over a year this war has been happening, and it took them this long to get kind of in control of the situation. Barely in control. I could say in control, but the U.S. was really not in control at this point. They were struggling to just get resources out and about. Anyway, the first shot from the just Mountain Destroyer would be heard from 42 miles away. At that exact moment, 197,000 U.S. Marines would feel their feet drop below them, and 152 million pounds of rock swallow them like a titan eating its lunch. When the Mountain Destroyer struck the Exil's heavies, they began to push forward, progressing forward. And they did not hold back. The Exils ran all the way to the mountain, over 122 yards away. That's how far these men were from their enemies. When they began climbing over the rocks and debris, any American, any human in sight was slaughtered. I would love to go into detail of the tactics these xil were using. But some of the things, well, they would not get me. The YouTube would not be very happy with me. Let's just say that it is the most gruesome things from any movie you've ever seen, and times it by 1,000. The xil would bite, chew, stab, devour, eat, execute anything that moved. The xil killed an additional 26,000 men as soon as they touched the mountain. Jean and his unit did a full-scale retreat, and the pillar of humanity had been lost. A modern-day Dunkirk was now in effect. Except help wasn't coming for everybody. Most of the men from the German units and French units stayed in that area, or fled inland towards Russia direction to try to slow down something. Most of them would die. The Marines in the 122nd lost 96% of their unit. Initially, they had around 400,000. Give her some change. I know early on I said that there was not a lot of U.S. troops in Europe at this time, but in that year period, that they had sent over 700,000 additional troops in that time period. So that's where the larger amount came from. I figured I mentioned that since I figured it might seem a little inconsistent. But the 123rd Marines and the Rangers lost a staggering 99%. 99%. 1 million men dead, missing, or wounded. The horrors that fell upon these men on the retreat to any bastion of hope is only comparable by stories from Hollywood. They were harassed the whole way back to the coast. Harassed. xil fighters would pick random spots and just start launching bombs in that direction. They would attack at night. The xil would find the U.S. camps during the day, wait to attack until night, and bombard the camps when the men were sleeping. 1,000 men would be lost in night attacks on the retreat back. When they reached the coastline, they were hoping for us to be there, waiting for them. But what they found was destroyed docks, destroyed boats, dead civilians everywhere, women, children, old, young, and empty streets. No sounds, no laughter, no sadness, no anger, just a void. They were cut off. There was no help coming. They would have to stay there until help would come. Whenever that might be. Within 2 months, John's unit would finally be rescued by the 197th Air Force Special Forces Division. This would be a large-scale helicopter operation. It would rescue around 135,000 troops to send off to Navy ships in order to be sent back statewide. John wrote in a letter on his helicopter ride home, the feelings that he had. And I think, even though this is a story and it's not a real life, I feel like any person can feel this man's pain. These were John's final moments in his memoir. John would never be heard from again after this. No one knows if he died or lived. But I think he got what he wanted to do of his life with this memoir. We were rescued 5 days ago. We're on the USS Lexington. The last 6 months have shaken me to my human core. 12 months ago, we thought we were the top. We thought we were the best of the best. The best humanity had to offer us. Nothing could stop us. Then them bastards did. And they destroyed us. And they kept going, and they kept digging the knife into our chest as we stared them in the face, begging for mercy. I watched them bomb cities with children in it, and had no remorse. If anything, they enjoyed it. I don't know what they came here for, or why they came here for it, but hell with them. No pit in hell would be deep enough. I pray that we will win this war. I fear that I may not be here long enough to see that victory. But to the brothers that I lost, do not fear. We tried our best in the end. We didn't stop trying. We didn't give up. We stayed until we couldn't say no more. Most of you gave your last breath to the idea that our kind, the human kind, means something. And I say thank you to those. And to those that weren't here, you will never understand. But be ready, because they're coming for us next. We're not safe. We're not alone in this galaxy anymore. And they're out for blood. Every inch. They want our water. They want our food. They want our power. They want everything from us. They will not let us have it. But do not let those men who died on that God-forsaken hill, in the fields for thousands of miles around it, to the airmen who flew their planes into literal death, I applaud you. To the medics, to the medic that lost his life running to me in moments which I thought I would never survive, I'm sorry. Those are the feelings of war that I will live on with. I won't live against them. I won't run away from them. But I will live with them. We lost a lot of good men. But they haven't beaten us yet. And if history's taught us anything, if they win this thing, they will pay for it. Every inch. Thank you guys for watching. I felt like this was a story that I really wanted to tell, even though it's far back. You know, we're over 100 years now past this point. But there's something I didn't talk about in the book. The Pillars of Humanity was a battle I never talked about in the book. But when I wrote it, I really felt the words and the meaning behind it. This wasn't a memoir to say that we were the best. This is a memoir to say we just got our ass kicked. But it's okay. It's not the end. We're gonna make it through it. And in a time in the world that we are now, I think it's important to take that time, or this time, to sit back and think about it. Our world is in chaos. People trying to kill each other over political beliefs. Entire minorities and groups being silenced for their views. The hungrier get hungry, or the hungry get hungrier. The poor get poorer, the rich get richer. The jobs get less jobs. But it's okay. We're gonna make it through it. We are one thing that no other species is. We're resilient. Through plagues, world wars, we survived. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like, subscribe. If you guys want to see more content based on my book, let me know down below. We'll have a video about a week, every week, if not every other week. I have the other series that's on the same day I normally upload this. This is normally on, I think, Mondays, but I wanted to upload it today since I overslept yesterday and I didn't want to upload it late, especially since it's a longer upload. If you guys are interested in my book, I do have a Patreon. You guys can go support me over there. That goes not only to my book, but to my gaming stuff as well, and my reenactment stuff for getting content for you guys. And then if you guys are really interested in donating to help me with the book, I do have a GoFundMe up, I think it is, or it's one of those charity apps. I don't remember which one. I set it up a while ago. I think it's a GoFundMe though. That is to help me get it published, because getting things published in the author era is very expensive. So if you guys want to help me do that, you can. And obviously there'll be bonuses for you guys. I think anyone that donates will be getting a copy of the book when it's published. So otherwise, I love you guys. You're one of a kind. Until the next one, later.